Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Paige host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today we welcome Dr. Brenda Volling, who's a developmental psychologist and award-winning educator and researcher at the University of Michigan. Her research focuses on early social and emotional development with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, parent-child interaction, and family relationships. Dr. Volling works primarily with young fathers during the prenatal period and the transition to fatherhood, and studies men's mental health, father-child relationships, and co-parenting. Her research has been showcased on CBS Sunday Morning, the BBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Parents Magazine. On today's episode, we discuss the essential role fathers play in the early years of a child's development. Enjoy the show.
Dr. Volling, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. Let's just get it started with from the 20,000 foot view. Can you share a bit about your research on the role of fathers for infant development with us?
Sure. Most of my research over the past years has focused on the transition to parenthood, mostly for first-time dads or new dads. I've also been doing research for the past several years on another developmental transition, and that's the transition that parents undergo with the birth of a second baby. My work focuses mostly on changes that are occurring in the family after these transitions. And when I say family, I mean all aspects of the family. So I focused on marriages. I focused on co-parenting, parent-child relationships with both mothers and fathers, that sibling relationship as how you get that off the ground. But because this is a podcast on the modern husband, perhaps I'll talk a bit more about some of the research I've done on marriage, because that may be what's most interesting to your audience at this point. Now, you may know that there has been decades of research on the transition to parenthood and how marriages change after the transition, after that first baby, with noticeable decreases in marital satisfaction, some increases in marital conflict, a more traditional division of childcare labor. However, we now know that those general trends that were uncovered decades ago are no longer sort of how we view this, because now we know that there really is no single way that a marriage changes over time after the birth of either the first or the second baby. There's huge variability in what this looks like, or what we refer to as individual differences. So yes, there are some marriages that decline in satisfaction, but there are many that pretty much stay the same. And there are actually some marriages that improve. So some of my recent work that we did after the second baby, we found that there were actually different kinds of marriages. And I'm going to talk about two of them that we found that I thought were the most interesting. And again, maybe of interest to listeners. So
yes,
we basically had couples who were expecting the second child. We asked them what their marriages were like in terms of the quality, in terms of how much conflict there may have been, disagreements, but also how much they felt a sense of belonging with one another, how much they cared about each other, and whether they really worked to try to maintain the relationship. And so when we talked to parents and we asked them repeatedly over the first year, we basically found that the vast majority of these couples saw their marriages very similarly. I also think it's really important to underscore that when we asked both, these were husbands and wives in two-parent families, when we asked them to complete the questionnaires about their marriages and those different aspects I just talked about, we asked them intentionally to derive their marriages independently. So they had to fill out their questionnaires separately from one another, so they weren't sharing their answers. They could share their answers afterward. Yes, it's always confidential research. Now, they had the option to share their answers afterwards with one another. We didn't, dictate any directions in that, but we really wanted to make sure we were getting separate views of the husband and the wife. So I want to point that out simply because I think the findings are even more interesting based on that information. So the vast majority of these couples, they saw their marriages very similarly. They had this shared perspective or this view on what their marriage looked like and what it was. So if moms were reporting that they had a very close relationship or marriage that was characterized by that sense of belonging I was talking about, and they were making lots of efforts to maintain that relationship with some conflict, but not a lot, the husbands also viewed things pretty much exactly the same. It was shocking how similar they were in their views. So they had a very shared view of their marriage. They tended to see things more positively than negatively, but they were basically in the same marriage. But there were these other couples, a smaller percentage, certainly by far, but these couples did not see things eye to eye at all. Their perspectives were completely different. They were quite discrepant in how they described or completed these questionnaires. And it could go in a number of different ways. So either the husband thought the marriage was amazing, but the wife was talking about how the relationship was filled with conflict and she was ready to walk out. Or it was the other way around, where the wife thought the relationship was going really well, but the husband was viewing the relationship as having far more conflict in it and very little happiness. So when you have these two different types of marriages that are so different, where honestly, that latter group of people, you wonder if they're in the same marriage, if they're actually married to the same person or they're living in the same house because their views are so discrepant. So I became interested with, well, are there other things that are going on in the family? Do these people have different personalities? Are there different dynamics happening here? And again, there were a couple of differences, but the ones I'm going to focus on because of this podcast is that the way they solved problems in their marriages was completely different. And when I thought about it, it made perfect sense. So those couples that I say had the shared worldview of what their marriage looked like, they reported, both the husbands and wives, that they were far more likely to engage in what we refer to as constructive problem solving, particularly around childcare and who did what and whether there were disagreements about who should be doing more or less. These were couples, when we talk about constructive problem solving, we're talking about couples that are likely to sit down. They're likely to present their perspectives and their particular side of things. They talk about what needs to be done. They actually listen to one another, and then they actively try to come up with some solutions. It may not necessarily be that they both get what they want. They may have to compromise, but they're able to work through this conflict. And this was completely different than the different worldview couples, okay? They were far more likely to be using what we refer to as destructive problem solving when they disagreed, particularly on childcare. And destructive problem solving includes things like yelling at each other, calling each other names, scolding each other, telling you never do this and I always that. Or they were talking at one another rather than actually listening to their partner. Sometimes they might threaten the other person, like, well, I'm going to leave if you don't do this. And as the title destructive implies, sometimes it might actually have ended up in a violent confrontation. So these relationships, these marriages were different, not only in terms of how the two partners saw their marriages, but how they were managing their actual relationships and particularly conflict, which is incredibly important when you're trying to maintain peace in the household, but also provide that context that we know that children thrive in, and you want parents to be able to solve things constructively and not destructively.
Were there any clear demographic patterns with the couples who did not see the relationship the same way?
Not really demographic, because these were predominantly, as I said, they were married couples. 98% of them were married. We didn't require them to be married, but they were. And they tended to come from the Southeast Michigan area, and were predominantly middle class. They were predominantly college educated. So we didn't see necessarily any real significant sociodemographic characteristic differences. That doesn't mean that if we had a different sample or somebody else had a different sample that they would see the same patterns. But for us, we did not find that to be as important as what we would call family processes in terms of how these couples were trying to manage their conflict.
And were these all heterosexual couples with like biological children?
Yes. We basically were very interested in looking at dads. That was one of the goals of this study because very few people look at fathers in research and very few people look at fathers in that perinatal period after the birth of an infant. And I've always been interested in fathers. So because we were recruiting the mothers through the OB-GYN clinics and we had interest in fathers, they ended up being heterosexual couples.
Were of the couples who, again, that they had conflicts, was there ever a point where they really sat down and thoughtfully planned out whose would be responsible for the caregiving, whose career would take more of a back seat, whose career would require more flexibility, or did they just default more into kind of gender norms where, historically speaking, women are the lead caregiver, men bring home the bacon?
Yeah, I can't speak to that because that would require probably sitting down and having more qualitative interviews with them. And this was more of a quantitative study where we had to fill out questionnaires. So I can't tell you whether they actually did eventually. I think the way the most marriages work is it's not a one size fits all, right? So it's not like they were doing these types of destructive marital problem solving in every instance. But when you looked at their, like, let's say the pattern that seemed to be used most, the discrepant couples with these different worldviews were using more of the destructive problem solving than the couples that had these shared worldviews of their marriage.
Can you help our listeners understand what you mean by worldviews?
Basically, based on my description, I'm using that term because they saw their marriages similarly. So I could have said shared perspective. I just happen to use shared worldviews because they're seeing their marital world similarly. They're describing it similarly versus the couples that were discrepant. And as I said, they just did not see their marriages the same at all.
When you say that, does that mean that they saw their own roles differently?
They didn't see their roles differently because the marital dynamic that we were capturing was the quality of the relationship. And what I mean by quality, it's their perceptions and feelings about how much they feel a sense of love from their partner, how much they feel that the two of them have a sense of belonging with one another, that they're actually working very hard to maintain the relationship so it stays in this more positive state. They do have disagreements. They have conflicts. So it's not as if that these are families with couples with no conflict. They do have conflicts, but as I said, they tend to solve them more constructively than destructively. And we also asked something about how ambivalent they felt about the marriage. So in their partner. So in other words, did they feel that this was a relationship they wanted to stay in? Did they feel that this was a partner that they had that was a good choice for them? So all those dynamics I just described are part of what we refer to as the quality of the type of relationship that they believed that they had between them.
And so, Dr. Volling, what steps should parents, and I guess specifically fathers, take to then prepare for their firstborn, given all of your research?
Okay, well, I'm a developmental psychologist and a family scientist, and I'm a professor. So my answer might be a little bit different than what others might emphasize. For instance, a nurse or midwife or whatever. But I'm going to offer my perspective based on being a developmental psychologist with interest in families and ultimately with the development and well-being of children. So honestly, I'm not sure classes, for instance, like in Daddy Boot Camp that allow men to diaper and feed an infant are the most helpful, although I know those are available. On the other hand, if fathers want to take those because they think it would be helpful and help them build confidence, then I, by all means, would recommend that you consider it. But as I noted earlier, I think when I was talking about marriages, there are different types of marriages and there are different types of families. And so when you have a baby, for instance, nobody really knows what this period is going to look like, right? Because their family is going to change drastically. And dads may not know how to care for a baby, but honestly, I'm not sure many new mothers also know how to prepare for an infant or care for an infant until that baby's on the scene. Um,
There's a societal expectation, right? There's a
yes,
societal expectation that they do, but reality can often be very different.
absolutely. Mothers, we expect in society that mothers are the experts. They have to be prepared. They have to step up the plate and be a dad. To be a mom. But dads don't necessarily see themselves that way. And I don't think they get that message from a number of different places. They don't get it from their family. They're not getting it from their workplace. But what we know is that the neuroscience studies tell us already that dads' brains are changing and getting ready for them to be dads and care for those babies. Their hormones are actually changing throughout the pregnancy to get them ready to be these dads. So I think the first thing I would like to tell new dads is to believe in the fact that you are ready to take on this dad role. Now, you may not know what you're doing, but most new parents don't know what they're doing because they don't know what this baby's going to bring. Every baby is different. Every baby has a different temperament. So even if you're having the first child or the second or the third, that new baby, even if you've taken care of other babies, they're going to have different sleep schedules. They're going to have different ways of feeding. Their temperament's either going to be easy or not. So that baby, you need to learn how to care for that baby, which will allow you to develop confidence over time. So I think confidence in being a dad and taking on that care role is what's really going to ultimately be important for fathers as well as their kids and as well as their partners, because they're going to be able to step in more. So how do you build confidence? People might be asking, well, how do I build confidence? Well, how do you learn how to do a new job? You do repeated practice over and over. It's hands-on experience day after day after day after day. Okay. So for instance, how do you calm a crying baby? How to calm a crying baby is something that we all have to learn. It may be different for each of our children, but you you pick the baby up, you swaddle them, you rock them, you shush them, you walk them around. And soon enough, if you are able to do this repeatedly, you're going to eventually become an expert in how to take care and soothe your baby. Many dads, because they lack that confidence, oh my God, it's a baby and I don't know what I'm doing here, they may actually turn the baby over or they'll be willing for mom or somebody else to take care of that baby. But if they basically use that hands-on experience and practice, they're going to be successful. And every time they're successful in parenting and caring for that child, and in this case, calming a crying baby, that's going to give them the confidence that I can do this. So my recommendation is if you have a chance to talk with another dad, like if I talked to a father this past summer who was having a second child, and I said, so where are you going to get your advice? And he says, oh, I have all these guys at work. They've all just had babies. And so I'm going to them and I'm talking to them about what they did and what it's like with them. If you have that social network and you have fathers who are willing to talk to you, talk to them. If they have babies, go over and be with that child. Pick up a baby if you've never talked to a baby. If you've never picked up a baby before. Get some tips. But also remember that your baby is going to be unique. And it's not going to be the same as their baby. And you're still going to have to, no matter how many babies you pick up or how many tips you get, you're still going to have to learn about your baby and what your baby needs. Okay? So I guess the other last thing I would say is, if the two of you are parents, I'm a mom, parenting, fathering is just like any kind of caregiving. It's probably going to be one of the most difficult things we all do. It is really hard work to be a parent because we're raising these little bitty human beings. But babies need their caregivers to attend to them. Newborns, for instance, cannot calm themselves on their own. They absolutely have to have that scaffolding from a caregiver. And dads are fully capable of stepping in and doing these things. And, just try different things. I know you love this baby. I know you love this baby. So just, as I said, cradle them, sing to them, dance with them, do all the things that you would like to do, and see how your baby responds. And whatever works, keep doing it.
I know you prefaced what you just shared, which was brilliant, with, well, this might be kind of contrary to what you've heard, or maybe others are saying the same something different. I have to say it falls in line perfectly with a podcast that we just had with Dr. Joshua Coleman. And essentially, one of the things that he shared is that societal norms often default women into feeling that they are the ones that have to do it, where men feel like that they don't have to do it, meaning they're never thrown into the fire. That men aren't told, just, you don't know how to change a diaper, go learn, just go do it. You don't need a YouTube tutorial on how to learn how to change a diaper. And if from the beginning, if the parents both take the same caregiving approach that you just suggested, where you're all in this together and you're both new to it, that it won't lead to, on down the road, a lot of the friction that parents have, where women are forced into feeling like they're the lead caregiver. And so when men ask how can they help, or they do something on their own, women get frustrated with them if they're not doing it as fast as they like, or the way that they're doing it, because they were kind of pushed into or forced into just doing it on their own. And now when a man is trying to step in, or husband or father, to help, it feels more like an intrusion than it does caregiving. And so from the very beginning, what he suggested is taking on the role of that, accepting that you're both caregivers and you both have to figure it out. So that was really, really great wisdom. I appreciate that.
Right.
I just as a follow-up, go ahead.
I was just say, this is a beautiful point, Brian. I was hoping I could maybe follow up myself, because if you asked about recommendations, another recommendation I would make is exactly in line with what you're saying, is that work beforehand to work with your partner. If it's a mom, work with your mom, with a wife, or your partner, to strengthen that co-parenting relationship before that child even gets there. As a family systems person, we refer to that couple relationship or that co-parenting relationship as the executive system of the family. And the two of you need to learn to work as a team. Often you hear the word, the term, teamwork is dreamwork. So the notion is, if you are arguing already now and you can't see eye to eye on how things need to be done or who should be doing what, and you don't know how to prepare for the baby, when you're going to be adding a new baby with an unpredictable schedule, with an easy or difficult temperament, you're having sleepless nights, that's just going to add to stress and lead potentially to more disagreements. So you really, like I was mentioning before, the couples who seem to manage are the ones who know how to communicate and work together and solve disagreements as a team. So I think that would be another thing that I would definitely recommend. Sit down and take a relationship education course. I would recommend that, to learn how to work together and come into this learning how you're going to be a team in this, than a daddy boot camp where you're going to learn how to diaper and feed, because you're going to pick that up. You're going to pick up feeding and diapering, but learning how to solve constructive problem solvings when emotions are high and heated and frustrated, and people are sleep deprived, that's not the time you want to sit there and go, maybe I should have taken that class on how to, figure out how to work together.
For our listeners, we did not put Dr. Volling up to this. We did not pay her for this. Our tagline, Dr. Volling, is that we share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. So everything is about teamwork. Our podcast episode, what we share in our newsletter, it's all about, what we find is often the missing link on the cooperation that's necessary and the strategies for spouses to work together, because the old siloed approach of there's a caregiver at home who just does that, and then there's a man that comes home that brings home the bacon. Like that is not what is in the majority anymore. And so we need to
It's
learn
not.
how to restructure how families operate. So thank you for reinforcing our mission. Dr. Volling, what outcomes have you found with fathers who form a strong bond with their children as infants?
Okay. So when you say outcomes, I'm not sure if you mean for the dad, the baby, or for both. So I'm going to sort of assume both and mention things from both sides.
Yes.
All of the above.
Yeah, all the
Okay.
above.
So when fathers have time to form that early emotional bond with their babies, they are also laying the foundation for a secure infant-father attachment relationship, because babies do form strong attachments to their dads. And developing a secure attachment with a caregiver, those of us who are developmentalists would claim that this is actually the most significant developmental task of the first year and in the early years, is to have a strong attachment with one of your caregivers. And that attachment relationship then is going to end up being the basis for all, shall I say, good things that come. In that relationship, your child is learning to trust you because you are there when they need you. You're responding to that baby's needs. You're calming the baby when they feel distressed, so eventually they feel safe and secure in your presence. And all of these things that I just mentioned that are happening already as babies is feeding into building not only that initial bond that's happening, but that relationship that you are beginning to build with this child throughout your life. Okay. So, yeah, you may have a baby now, but someday if you're 70 years old, that 45-year-old is still going to be your child. And that type of relationship you have then was already started and built years and years before, given the time, effort, and attention that you spent on building it. So it is worth the time having that to build the relationship and that social connection. Your children are going to benefit because you are there for them. They know that they can come to you in tough times, okay, for instance, but you're also serving as that, we refer to as that secure base, that safe haven when things may be tough and they may be frightened or anxious or whatever. So if you think about not just the babies, but this notion I'm trying to get at of relationship building and how it's built over time, and you want to be able to maintain and continue that for your children and yourself, imagine you no longer have a baby, but that baby grows up and is now an adolescent. Maybe your son, for instance, is going to school and he's having difficulties. Maybe he's getting bullied. Or maybe your daughter just had her first breakup with her boyfriend and her heart is broken. These are really big emotions, even for an adolescent to have to deal with. So the question I would have for dads is, do you want those children to come to you to talk about these difficult moments in their life because they believe that you are this reassuring, trusting, confident dad that they can talk to whenever they need something and can trust? Or are you okay with them coming home and going up to their bedrooms and locking their doors and not talking, and keeping all these hurt feelings inside? Because the relationship you have is going to help benefit your children, not just now, but in the long run. And I'm going to venture to guess that most men, fathers, are going to say, I want the first type of relationship. I want my kids to feel that they can come to me and talk to me, even about big emotions and intense feelings. So that's what I think children are getting from these. Again, I know we started with a strong bond with infants, but my point is a developmentalist. I'm always going to have a developmental story here. It's building and changing over time. So it starts there, but it doesn't end there. You have to keep working on that relationship if you want your children to feel close and safe and come to you. Now, men also benefit tremendously as well from having these types of relationships with their children. And I don't think we always think this way, because I think the current narrative out there that I'm seeing a lot as well, men are really stoic and they don't express their feelings and they need to maintain their masculine identities. And there probably is some truth to that. But I have talked to plenty of fathers and men over the last years who tell me that becoming a father was one of the most significant transitions in their life. It is being, defining themselves as fathers is such a central part of their identity. I've even had some men say, it actually made me a better man because I'm now responsible for somebody else. I'm not thinking just about myself. So, again, it changed them. And I don't want to give the impression that, life is such, a bowl of cherries and, being a dad's going to be all wonderful. Because as I said before, parenting is hard work. It is really hard work. But there's also joy in being a dad. And I know from talking with that, they love these kids. They would do anything for them. And honestly, when I think about emotions, that's about as emotional as it gets, is being a parent and making those emotional connections and having those social connections in their lives.
Hey there, podcast fam. We'd love to hear from you. Please take this moment to rate and subscribe to our podcast. Your feedback fuels our passion to bring you more engaging content. And please text this episode to your friends. It's your support that can help us grow. Now back to the show.
I think that's very well said. And as you're talking, I mean, I know and I'm oversimplifying it, but I think of because we've talked a lot about on our podcast, money and finances and preparing for the long term. So we have the time value of money, right? That you have to start early if you want that financial security. But if you want that relationship security later on, you have to start early. There's a time value of the relationship. There's a time value of the bonds that you're growing with your kids. And so just like we want to see that, eventual exponential curve, you can't just start in your 50s planning for your retirement. You got to start as early as possible, right? And so, I loved how you shared all of that with us. So what can fathers do as caregivers that's going to be the most meaningful for their child's development?
Okay, so that's kind of a hard one to answer, because most meaningful needs to be asked as most meaningful for what? Okay. Again, I'm a developmental psychologist, so I'm going to focus on development and children's development. So when I think about development, there are so many different aspects of development, right? There's social development, emotional, language, cognitive. And within each of those broad categories, there are also so many different sets of skills that our children need to learn. And that's going to change over time. So I would say, well, what age are we talking about here? Are we talking about infants, toddlers, preschoolers, elementary school, adolescents? My answer is going to be completely different depending upon what age we're talking about. And the reason is because little humans are actually quite amazing. Their tiny little brains in infancy are already so eager for information that they learn and they grow and they learn and they grow so quickly. And it's this quick development, this rapid development, okay, which is what makes parenting unpredictable from one moment to the next. So what your child is like today, that little human you have today, is probably very different than they were 6 months prior, okay? And it's these day-to-day changes in these children's development that makes life unpredictable. It makes parenting exhausting, but it also makes it exhilarating because you get to see the new things that your child can do. So what's the most meaningful? I love this question.
And I'll make it easier for you. Let's do just one example, because as you were responding, I realized, oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, you probably could have 5 different classes on this. What
it was
about,
too broad.
Yeah,
it is.
Well,
it is.
Yeah, exactly. But
Opening.
I was getting ready to pinpoint right down to what you want, Brian. So I think we're thinking the same here.
You do it.
So
Go for it.
okay, so I was going to say, I'm going to pinpoint into, I'm going to talk about one particular area, and I'm going to give the example. I'm teaching my course right now on infant development to my undergraduates. And when I get to the section about cognitive development, about infant cognitive development, and I start talking about how children learn by acting on the world and playing with toys and objects, at one point in my lecture, I show them a slide. And on this slide, there are 4 pictures. They have different types of toys, educational toys, any kind of, they're toys that any parent can buy in any store, okay?
Mm.
And then I say, okay, based on your knowledge now of infant development, look at these toys and pick the one that you think is the most important with respect to enhancing children's development. The class, they're all lifting their hands and telling me their different answers. They're picking their favorites. They're providing their explanations. And in their answers, they always are focused on the toys, the different types of toys, what I call the bells and whistles. So they're literally talking about things like the different sounds that this toy makes, or how this one is more important because it has more colors and it's going to grab the baby's attention. Or no, this one's better because it's going to enhance fine motor skills because, oh, look at all those little knobs they can turn. Oh, no, this one's the best one because it plays music and the baby will get to sing along with it. Rarely do they point or mention the one picture with the baby that's playing in the bathtub with a set of plastic animals. Okay? They've all chimed in. And when they're done, I say to them, well, folks, I hate to admit this, but this was really a trick question. And there's really only one quite right answer here from a developmental perspective. Because you see, in only one of those pictures is there a parent playing alongside with the child.
Mm.
And it's actually a parent that is sitting next to the bathtub with those plastic animals playing with that baby. So I end by telling them, you are the most important toy for your child. So spend time playing with them, connecting with them, again, building that relationship with them, teaching them, talking to them, reading stories, creating fantasy worlds. Dads, wrestle with them. Yes, we have rough and tumble play as something that we look at in research and see the benefits of a rough and tumble play for learning how to regulate emotions. And I will guarantee you that if you put a child down and you say, you have a choice between a room there filled with toys, all those toys that I bought, similar to what I just talked about, or dad just sitting on the floor with a book, that kid is going to pick dad every single time. Not necessarily because of the book, because it's dad who's going to read the book, okay, or play with those plastic animals. He's going to be the one who's going to be making those goofy animal sounds. He's going to be asking questions like where, what, why, how. That's language. That's going to enhance language development. Children aren't going to learn that by themselves. Dads, I think when I talk to them, they often act, I think society tells them this, that they are not as important to their children's development as, say, the mother, and that their primary role is actually to be the primary breadwinner and bring home the paycheck that buys all those toys. And that everything else that I just described, like taking time to play, pretending, crawling around the floor and pretending to be a horsey and let your kid ride on your back or go outside and do some kind of adventure, that might be seen as, well, it's fun, but it's also frivolous nonsense, right? So I need to be, a real dad. So, but I'm here to say, as a developmentalist, all of those things I just described, fun, funny, goofy, your child loves those things. And those are the things that we as developmentalists know build connections. They are the building blocks of human connections and social relationships and early brain development. And dads are just as important, or very incredibly important, in helping in all those ways. So dad. It's you as a person, as a father, getting down there and playing with your kid that ultimately is what's going to enhance all those different aspects of development.
What a wow! What an incredible answer. Yeah, you blew me away on that.
Yeah, Dr. Volling, that was that was such an incredible answer. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights about your research, about your work, your experience and expertise. I know we have benefited immensely from it, and I know our listeners have as well. So where can folks turn to learn more about you and about your work?
Well, the first place they can go is they can always go to my faculty website at the University of Michigan in the Department of Psychology. They can also go to the Volling Lab website, which is linked to my faculty website. That's the Child and Family Development Lab. There I have a summary of pretty much all the research studies and projects that I've done over the years. And with each of those, there are some representative publications. If your listeners are actually interested in publications and reading the papers, I'm not sure how many people are interested in reading scientific publications, but if they're so inclined, they can also go on to Google Scholar and just type my name in, and they'll find everything I've ever published and read to their heart's content.
Thank you so much.
And what advice do you have for our listeners that kind of coalesces today's episode into, this one simple idea that is easily turned into action?
I don't think there's anything simpler and more easily to implement than making the time to connect and play with your child. Just play, have fun, enjoy your child. You don't even need toys. As I said, you can make goofy faces. You can tell them stories. Tell them stories about your own childhood. Take them for horseback rides, as I said, around the living room. Tell those dad jokes. Go outside for a walk. Spend time with your kids. It's facilitating development, and honestly, your kids are going to love it, and they're going to love you.
What a wonderful episode. Dr. Volling, thank you for joining us.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow Modern Husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.